To 1 Samuel chapter 18. That's where we're going to be starting out this evening. 1 Samuel chapter 18. This morning we talked a lot about David and his life. That's where we spent a big chunk of our time this morning. And how throughout his life, as long as he kept his focus on God, everything was going just A-okay for him. Everything went perfectly. But as soon as he turned his sights away from God, things started to go south. And we pulled some other examples from Adam and Eve and from Peter in the New Testament, and we looked at that this morning. This evening, I still want to talk about David a little bit. If you get to know me very well, you'll know that I tend to over-preach on David. I just absolutely love David. Love studying the life of David, love looking at it. There's just so many good stories that we can glean out of David's life. And so I want to look at the love that Jonathan and David had for one another. And then we'll go to the New Testament and see that same theme carried through into the New Testament and how we're to apply that to our lives. So in 1 Samuel chapter 18, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now it came about, when he had finished speaking to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered. And Saul set him over the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants." So we see here that David and Jonathan meet, and they start getting to know each other. As soon as Jonathan meets David and gets to know him, it says their souls were knit, and Jonathan loved David. And we see here that he takes off everything that he has on him and gives it to David. He gives him his armor, his sword, his bow, his belt. He gives him his robe. Do you think these gifts were just commonplace items? No, like I would give a t-shirt to a friend of mine? No, the robe he was wearing was probably made out of purple cloth. Just the finest cloth available. The suit of armor would have been a suit of armor that would have been just masterfully made. The bow would have been one of the best bows to have. The sword would have been just immaculate and wonderful. These are kingly gifts. Jonathan's own equipment that he uses in war, he gives to David because he loved him. We continue in verse 6 and we see that Saul wasn't as fond of David. In verse 6, "And it happened as they were coming, when David returned from killing the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. The women sang as they played and said, 'Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. Then Saul became very angry, for this saying displeased him. And he said, 'They've ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they've ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?' So Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on." So you see, while this love was growing between Jonathan and David, Saul gets jealous. I kind of find this a little bit funny. Doesn't this almost seem like a very childish thing to do? Oh, well, his toy is bigger than mine. Oh, his car is fancier than mine. Oh, he got a nicer gift than I did. That's the type of childish that Saul's applying here. Oh, they said he's more impressive in war than me. Oh, poor me. So Saul just has this pettiness and not this love for David. And Jonathan has this extreme love for him. If you turn over to the next chapter, in chapter 19. We're going to start in verse 1 again. "Now Saul told Jonathan his son and all his servants to put David to death. But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David. So Jonathan told David, saying, 'Saul my father is seeking to put you to death. Now therefore, please be on guard in the morning and stay in the secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak with my father about you. If I find out anything, then I will tell you. Then Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, "Do not let the king sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his deeds have been very beneficial to you. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine. And the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death without a cause?" Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. And Saul vowed, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." So we see here, we read this passage this morning, Saul hates David to the point where he wants to kill him. He's going to pursue him and just cut him down, kill him. And Jonathan's kind of the voice of reason in the whole matter. He says, "Well, slow down, hold on. What has David done to you? What has David done to deserve this?" And so he changes Saul's mind. Turn over to the next chapter, chapter 20. Starting verse 1 again. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father that he is seeking my life?" So pause for a second. We just read that Saul vowed to Jonathan. He says, "Okay, as the Lord lives and as I live, David's not going to die." But now, in the beginning of chapter 20, Saul's right back trying to kill David again. Picking up in verse 2. He said to him, that is, Jonathan said to David, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. So why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." Yet David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your sight. And he has said, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved.' But truly as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is hardly a step between me and death." So David says, "Okay, you say your dad's not going to kill me, but here I am. I'm basically already 1 foot in the grave. I'm all but dead. I just have to stumble over the edge and I'm already dead." That's how much Saul wants me dead. That's how close Saul is to killing him. And verse 4. Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." So David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I ought to sit down to eat with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all," then said, "David earnestly asked to leave me to run to Bethlehem, his city, because it's the yearly sacrifice there for the whole family. If he says, 'It is good,' your servant will be safe. But if he is very angry, know that he has decided on evil. Therefore deal kindly with your servant. For you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with me. But if there is iniquity in me, put me to death yourself. For why then should you bring me to your father?" So we see here, Saul's going after David. And Jonathan says, "No, he's not." And David says, "Yeah, he's after me. He's trying to kill me." So Jonathan says, "Okay, whatever you need, I'll do." And so David says, "Okay, go talk to your dad. And if he's mad that I'm not there, know that he's going to kill me." Just take a step back for a second. This is now 2 times. Well, because after this covenant, Jonathan goes and stands up to his father and deceives him to save David's life. Which one of you would want to go toe-to-toe with your father once? I'm going to step back right now and say I would not. My dad's a preacher, so I'm a little bit scared of him for that reason, but he's also a soldier, so that makes me even doubly scared of him. I don't want to go toe-to-toe with that guy. And yet, Jonathan here, for the sake of David, goes toe-to-toe with his father. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. As we'll see later on in this chapter. If you turn, still in chapter 20, to verse 30. 1 Samuel 20 verse 30 says, "Then Saul's anger burned against Jonathan. He said to him, 'You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you are choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Therefore now send and bring him to me, for he must surely die." But Jonathan answered Saul his father, and said to him, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Then Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him down. So Jonathan knew his father had decided to put David to death. Then Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger and did not eat food on the second day of the new moon, for he was grieving over David because his father had dishonored him. So I'd already said I won't go up against my father twice. Jonathan goes toe-to-toe with Saul, the king of Israel, someone who has proven over and over and over again through his kingship to have a bit of a temper problem. Jonathan goes toe-to-toe with him. Says, "No, don't kill Saul. Don't kill David. You're not allowed to do that. What has he done?" Jonathan sticks up for David because he loves him. Because his soul was knit to David. And we see later on in 2 Samuel that David remembers this. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, we see a really cool story. Actually, this story kind of, as you're turning there, just a real quick story time. Whenever I learned this story, the story of David's kindness to Mephibosheth, whenever I was in Bible school or whatever as a kid, I never once had a teacher who would say this word. Mephibosheth would say his name without stuttering or just not even saying the word at all. I had one teacher one time just say, "You know the name. I'm not going to say it." So just a little funny. But David shows kindness to Jonathan's son Mephibosheth. 2 Samuel chapter 9, starting in verse 1. It says, "Then David said, 'Is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?' Now there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David, and the king said to him, 'Are you Ziba?' And he said, 'I am your servant.' The king said, 'Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?' And Ziba said to the king, 'There is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet.' So the king said to him, 'Where is he?' And Ziba said to the king, 'Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, in Lodabar.' Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, from Lodabar, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face, prostrating himself. And David said, 'Mephibosheth.' And he said, 'Here is your servant.' David said to him, 'Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly.' And again he prostrated himself, 'What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me?' Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, 'All that belonged to Saul, and to all his house, I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce, so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly.' Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants." So we see here that David seeks out Saul's grandson. Now just from a political aspect, in this time when kings would go and conquer a country, what would usually happen to the reigning family? They would usually all be killed, right? Go and wipe out every last one of them. Well, the reason for that was, if you didn't do that, then the people's loyalty would always be towards that one person from the remaining family. That was common practice. And so, instead of killing Mephibosheth, David seeks him out, draws him out of a crowd, and raises him up. The one person who could possibly try to undermine him and try to take away the kingdom from him. And he did this all for Jonathan. Lifts him up, gives him wealth, gives him land, gives him servants again. All for the sake of Jonathan. Because of that brotherly love that David and Jonathan had for one another. It's a really cool story, isn't it? Really awesome story of the love that David and Jonathan had for one another. If you turn to Proverbs chapter 18, we see that Solomon had something to say, probably about the same situation, but it at least fits the situation. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 24. It says, "A man of too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." That's the love that David and Jonathan had for one another. That's what it's talking about in this verse. A friend that sticks closer than a brother. That's how David and Jonathan were. Can you imagine what it would be like today if all of us had that love for one another? If all of us had that same sort of love, our souls were knit, just like David and Jonathan's. Turn to the New Testament to John chapter 15. We see Jesus talking about this through John's writing. John chapter 15, starting in verse 12. Jesus says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, He may give to you. This I command you, that you love one another." So we're given a straight command from Jesus to love one another. So I want to look at this passage and draw out two applications for us. Two ways. One, how are we to show love? And two, how did Jesus show this love to us first? I want to look at those two things, and then the sermon will be yours. We turn back a couple chapters in John, to John chapter 13. We see this command reiterated. Actually, I guess it would be pre-iterated, because it was said before the passage that we just read. John chapter 13 and verse 35. He says, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. That's how we're to be known. We're not to be known because of how rude we are. We're to be known by how much we love. And you can see people in your life that are like that, right? Who are the people that you're drawn to? Who are the people that you like the most in your life? It's those people that genuinely care, aren't they? They're the people that love everyone around them. It's those people that are just a source of joy for everyone in their lives because they love everybody. And they spread that love. That's what we're called to do. Now, that being said, the word love is severely misunderstood. Especially among my generation. You know, we say so easily, "Oh yeah, I love him," or "I love her. I love that thing. I love this. I love that brand new Corvette that just came out. That's an awesome car. I love that car." We use that term and we throw it around so much that it just becomes that warm, fuzzy feeling that we get sometimes. That's what we think love is. Is that what love really is? I think love is a learning curve. This is just my personal opinion. I think throughout our life we learn to love in new and more ways, and we learn more and more what love really is. Saying love is self-sacrificial is just getting your foot in the door. Saying love is caring about other people more than yourself. You're just starting to understand it. And it's a really hard thing to define. But this love that we're to show, that's how we're to be known, that we love one another. It's putting other people before yourself. It comes down to humility. Humbling yourself. Not saying, I'm the most important person in the room. But saying, those are the most important people in the room. Those are the people we should be caring about. By caring about everybody else, that's the love we're to show. If you turn to Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6, we're going to be starting in verse 27. We see an example of this love that we're to show. But it's not necessarily the most satisfying passage. It's kind of hard. Luke chapter 6 and verse 27. He says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Whoever hits you on the cheek, offer him the other also. And whoever takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt from him either. Give to everyone who asks of you. And whoever takes away what is yours, do not demand it back. Treat others the same way you want them to treat you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High. For He Himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." I love this passage, but it's very hard to put into effect, isn't it? Love your enemies. Whew. Already, that's a tough one. We can say all day, yeah, I love my enemies. Those people at a distance who I don't really like, yeah, I love them. I want them to get to heaven. Yeah, but what about that person who cuts you off in traffic in Tampa on your way to work? What about that person who lives next door to you who never cuts his bushes back enough? Do you love them the same way? That's a hard one, especially for me. A lot of these sermons, I'm pointing at myself as well. Love your enemies. As a 19-year-old who's pretty hot-headed, how easy is that to do? It's not very easy. It's a difficult one. But going on, it shows, if you love those who love you, verse 32, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. That makes sense, doesn't it? If someone loves you first and treats you right first, it's pretty easy to like them, right? It's pretty easy to get along with them, to love them. I would hope that I would love my mom. I would hope that I would love my dad. They loved me first. But he says, love those who can't do you any good. Love those who don't love you. Lend to those who can't pay you back. Give of yourself 100%, 110%. I think that's a key factor of love. Love isn't just, okay, yeah, other people are more important than me. Yeah, I'm going to worry about them. It's giving of yourself when everything inside you tells you not to. It says here to lend to those, let's see, in verse 34. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good. Lend, expecting nothing in return. Tell me, does that make sense at all from a business perspective? Yeah, I'm going to lend a guy $500 and know he can't pay me back, so I'm not even going to expect that $500 back. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. We're like, no, we're not going to do that. Well, it's a part of love. You help people out who need it. You give of yourself. And you give of yourself. And when you can't give any more, then you give a little bit more. That's love. And we'll look here in a few minutes about how that's exactly what Jesus did to us first. If you turn to Matthew chapter 28. We're going to see one of the most well-known commandments given to us. So we're commanded to love. And Matthew chapter 28 and verse 19 says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I command you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." It says, go preach the word. By preaching the word, what are you doing? Showing love. You're loving that person who is lost in sin. You're loving that person who at this moment in time does not know Jesus, does not know God, has not been saved. That's a form of showing love. And that's how we're to be known as Christians. That's how we're to be known as those who love. It's a hard concept to get right. But it's something we need to be constantly striving for. If you turn back to John chapter 15. In verse 14, John 15 and verse 14, Jesus says, "You are my friends if you do what I command you." You are my friends if you do what I command you. So these two commandments that we're given, to love and to go out and preach the word. We're a friend to Jesus. We love Jesus if we do these things to others. Our way of showing love to God is showing love for one another and trying to save one another. That's our commission here. And that's exactly what Jesus did for us first. If you back up just a verse, in verse 13, it says, "Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends." There's no greater love than putting down your very essence, your life for your friends. And that's exactly what Jesus did, right? Our immediate thought is to think, well, yeah, He died on the cross. Well, yes, at the end of His life, He gave up what was left of His life for us. But if you turn over to Matthew chapter 1, actually, we'll start in chapter 3. Chapter 1 is the genealogy of Jesus. Chapter 2 is Jesus' birth and the visit of the Magi and the flight to Egypt. And in chapter 3, Jesus goes and gets baptized. Well, why does He get baptized? To fulfill Scripture, so that He could preach to us, so that we could go to heaven. Chapter 4, Jesus goes out into the wilderness. He's tempted. Why did Jesus need to be tempted? So He could fulfill prophecy, so that He could preach to us, so that we could be saved. Jesus begins His ministry in chapter 5. He starts preaching the Sermon on the Mount. Well, as you read through the Sermon on the Mount, what is a very common trait of all what Jesus is saying? He's like, hey, here's how to be saved and how to live life better. In chapter 5, it says, verse 1, "When Jesus saw the crowds, He went up on the mountain, and after He sat down, His disciples came to Him. He opened His mouth and began to teach them, saying, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.'" What's this list that Jesus is going through right here at the beginning? Well, that's how to get closer to God and how to be saved. Going through, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." He's saying that for our benefit. He's saying that for the benefit of the people who are there. Chapter 6 is more giving, preaching for their benefit so that they can get saved. Chapter 7, the same thing. Chapter 8, Jesus cleanses a leper. But in verse 4 of chapter 8, Matthew chapter 8 and verse 4, Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest, and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Why would Jesus heal someone and then not have him tell no one about it? Say, "Hey, don't tell anybody about this." For that person's good. Giving of himself purely for the good of someone else. That's love that he's showing. We see in chapter 8, there's questions and answers that he's given. In 9, he heals a paralytic. And we see, starting in verse 14 of chapter 9, that people are starting to have questions for him. And they come to him and say, "Rabbi," or "Jesus, what about this? What about this?" And Jesus answers their questions so that they can get closer to God. So that they can be saved. We see in chapter 10, he calls his 12 disciples. Well, what does he do with his 12 disciples immediately? He says, "Hey, come here guys. Go and teach people. Go and help people. Go and heal people." He's doing all these things. He gave up his entire life. It's estimated he was here for around 33 years. He gave up those 33 years that he was here. And he gave it to us. He gave it to the people around him. He gave of himself over and over and over and over again. And at the end of Matthew, we see that he gives the greatest sacrifice. Chapter 27. And verse 45. Matthew 27, verse 45. "Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon all the land, until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, 'Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?' That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of those who were standing there, then they heard it, began saying, "This man is calling for Elijah." And immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the rest of them said, "Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep or had died were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. See, in chapter 27, Jesus gives his life. And it seems by the reaction how the veil in the temple splits in two, the rocks split, the earth shakes, the very earth mourns Jesus is dying. See, we're given this commandment to love one another. That's how we're to be known as Christians. But Jesus is only asking us to do what he has already done. He's only asking us to do and to give of ourselves as he has already done and given of himself. Everything that we're commanded to do is to be exactly like Jesus. To do exactly the things Jesus did. And to a lesser extent. We're very blessed to live in America where we will not have, most likely, to be crucified for Christ. We're not going to have to do that. And yet Jesus did. John chapter 15 and verse 13. "No greater love has anyone than this, that someone lay down his life for his friend." That's the love that David and Jonathan had for one another. And that's the love we're to have today. That's the love Christ showed for us. And that's the love we're to have and to show. I really enjoyed studying this. Going through this, looking at the life of David. Like I said, I love studying the life of David. And we see a lot of the same things that David shows in his life. Jesus shows in his life as well. This love is such an important concept. And if we showed just a little bit more love, the world would be an astronomically better place. We can change so many things by just loving a little more. So, here comes the challenging part of the sermon. The sermon is just about yours. This week, as you go into this week, choose that one person that you don't like very much. Go and talk to them. Give them a smile. Give them a handshake. Give of yourself to that person. Do it for this week. The end of this week, next Sunday, think back over the past week and be like, oh yeah, that one guy that we didn't really know said that one thing last Sunday. And do that again for the next week. And the next week. And the next week. Before you know it, you'll have done it for your entire life. And you'll be right next to Jesus in heaven. In that wonderful place, in that fantastic place. If you've not been showing love quite like you ought to this past week or in your life, and you want to repent of that, and you want to come back to Jesus and ask Him for your forgiveness and continue on with your life showing that love better, or if you need to be baptized tonight, there's no better time than tonight. Don't wait. Please come forward as we stand and sing.